Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Next to Madison. This is episode 168, and today we are talking hormones. Men, let's not lose you here. Hormones are important to you too. I am sitting down with America's Happy Hormones doctor to talk about how hormones impact everything from our moods, sex drive, success. Really everything we do is kind of derived from our hormones. And so we're going to take a deep dive into that. If you're feeling just a little anxious or just down and just not yourself, it could be your hormone. So I'm really going to dive deep to try to get all the different emotions that most of us feel so we can determine what hormones we may be lacking in. So when we see our primary care physician, they can either recommend something or you can go see a hormone specialist and get tested yourself. So this is a very important issue. Again, if you want to be happier, healthier, and wealthier, it is important that you have all areas of your life working. And if you're feeling depressed or anxious or nervous or just not yourself, you're not going to be able to be the best at your job. So it really impacts everything. So we will be right back after this brief message from our sponsor with our guest on this episode of Next to Madison.
This episode is brought to you by Balance 7. Balance 7 is a concentrated alkaline with a pH of 11+. I didn't realize that acidosis is responsible for almost every infectious disease in our world today. With COVID-19 and the world opening back up, I started taking Balance 7, and after 3 days of taking it, I feel better, I have more energy, my focus is better, I think clearer. This supplement is amazing. Thanks, Dr. Noristani, for the recommendation. And all Next to Madison listeners are able to try it today by visiting balance7.com and enter code word Madison for a complimentary gift and free shipping.
Okay, we are back with our guest on this episode of Next to Madison. I am with America's Happy Hormone doctor, Dr. Deb Matthews. How are you?
I'm good. It's so exciting to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. I think this is like such an important topic that doesn't get discussed enough. So the first thing I want to do is tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into this specific field.
Yeah. Well, I was just a regular doctor and I didn't feel good. I was exhausted all the time. Napping was like my biggest priority of the day, figuring out how can I take a nap? And I was irritable. I felt like I was just screaming at my kids all the time over the stupidest little things. You know, somebody left their shoes at the doorway or something. And I would listen to myself shrieking at them and just feel so guilty for being like the worst mom ever. And I remember sometimes I would look at my husband and just not even remember why I married him. Like I remember we were on our 10th wedding anniversary and he'd taken me out for dinner and we're having wine and it's a lovely dinner and everything is great. And just out of the blue, I looked over at him and I thought, why did I marry this man? Like, what was I thinking? And
wow,
he's a great guy. Like he hadn't done anything whatsoever. It was just, I thought that I was crazy. He thought that I was crazy, I think too. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. There was nothing in my medical training that helped me understand what was going on with me. I knew I didn't feel like myself. And I didn't think I was depressed. But what really helped me sort it out is actually I read a book that was written by Suzanne Summers. And you remember Chrissy Snow from Three's Company? She was that ditzy blonde character. And that's not who you turn to for your medical advice, especially when you're a medical professional. That's not where we want to learn from. But I read the book because I didn't know what else to do. And it totally opened my mind when I read all of these stories about women who felt just like me. And then when they got their hormones balanced, they felt so much better. So it allowed me to, like I said, open my mind, realize that there were places that I could go to learn. This isn't woo-woo science. There's real, woo-woo medicine. There's real science behind this. But most of the time, the problem is not fixed by a drug. And because there's no, pharmaceutical prescription to solve the problem, it somehow hasn't really kind of made it into mainstream medicine and part of our regular medical school curriculum. But once I really learned, I was able to get my energy back. My kids got their mom back. My husband got his wife back. I had my life back, but I just couldn't go back to what I used to do, which was just writing prescriptions all day long. So I retired from my old job. And now for the last 15 years, I've been helping men and women get their hormones back in balance so that they can get well, get off a lot of their prescription drugs, and really love the way they feel.
And that is so important, because I think people, like, you start to feel tired and you're thinking, well, maybe I just didn't sleep the night before, or maybe I took too much melatonin, or you're crabby, and you identify it to something else external in your life, whether it's like, oh, I hate my job, or I don't have great friends, or my friends are mean, or my friends are great, but I don't see it, but it's really internal.
Absolutely. And a lot of times when we don't feel good, our brain will kind of search for why don't we feel good? And you can always come up with stuff. But if you just felt great, your brain would think of something productive, and, you just move on and be happy.
So how do people figure out what hormone imbalances they have?
This is a really difficult question, because really the answer would be you just go get lab testing done to get your hormone levels measured. But if you were to go into your regular doctor, your gynecologist or whatever, hormone testing, quote unquote, is just not really something that is done in medicine. We do lab testing to try to identify if you have a disease. And so if you walked in and said, could you test my hormones? They don't really have like a checkbox on the form for that. So sometimes it's important to find a doctor who sort of specializes in this whole concept of natural hormone balancing. Typically, it would be called a functional medicine doctor, who would be somebody who has additional training to really understand, what we're about to talk about here. And that's different than an endocrinologist. An endocrinologist is a doctor who specializes in hormones, but they're the doctor who specializes in like diseases of your hormones. So things like hyperthyroidism and diabetes, etc. So if you have a disease, if you have a hormonal tumor or something, that's who you need. But if this is just your hormones are out of whack because of lots of things that we'll talk about, then a functional medicine doctor is somebody who can help you just get back into balance and feel like yourself again.
So is it a blood test that they usually start with?
We can do blood testing. Sometimes we even do saliva testing or urine testing, especially for cortisol. Can we talk about cortisol for a minute?
Yeah, of course. That's a stress hormone, right?
Yeah. So everybody kind of knows about cortisol, right? When we get stressed, cortisol goes up. And in the short term, that's a good thing, right? It helps you cope with stress. You can get through your day. You can get, your deadline, whatever you got to do. The cortisol kind of pushes and helps you get through it. The problem is when we are stressed out day in, day out, when there's like, I don't know, a pandemic maybe, or, stock market is collapsing or whatever. When we have chronic stress, sometimes what happens is cortisol kind of gets stuck too high. And when you have chronically elevated cortisol, we don't feel good. And I'm going to talk about some of the symptoms. And I think a lot of people are going to recognize some of these symptoms.
I'm writing it down.
Cortisol is kind of like long-acting adrenaline. So it's like you got too much adrenaline going through your system. You always kind of feel like you're in that fight or flight response. So you can feel anxious, right? Like your heart rate speeds up a little bit. You don't necessarily sleep soundly. It can be hard to fall asleep, or you can wake up in the night. You get belly fat, which everybody hates.
Interesting.
Food cravings, depression, your blood pressure can go up. It can make your blood sugar go up. So then when you go to your, doctor for your annual physical, your labs start to be out of whack. And there's a pattern that we see when we're stressed and our cortisol is out of whack. And that pattern is often that it's hard to wake up in the morning. Naturally, what's supposed to happen is cortisol levels go up in the early hours of the morning, kind of like a little mini adrenaline rush. And that makes our eyes pop open, and then we can leap from our bed ready to start our day and, take on the world. But when our cortisol is out of whack, then we don't get that little spike. And then it's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to wake up. Like you press snooze a
Yeah.
couple of times, and you have to, even when you physically drag your body out of bed, you're kind of not really all the way woken up yet. And a lot of people sort of drag themselves over to the coffee pot because caffeine gives you a little boost of cortisol so that your brain can wake up and you can feel a little bit better. So it can be hard to get started in the morning. And then once you get moving, then you're okay for a while. And then in the late afternoon, like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a lot of people will get that slump. For me, I had to have caffeine in the afternoon if I was going to remain awake, go through the carpool line to pick up my kids after school. Otherwise, I would have totally conked out at the wheel, and my minivan would have hit the minivan in front of me, and it would have been so embarrassing to be in a 1 mile an hour car crash in the carpool line. But I could not stay awake. So that crash in the afternoon is really common.
Wow.
And then a lot of people will feel a little bit better by supper time, but after supper, sitting on the couch watching TV, nodding off early, 7:30, 8 o'clock, kind of earlier than you would normally go to bed. But if they stay up late enough, now 10 o'clock, they're wide awake and ready to go, and it's really hard to fall asleep. And then when they do finally fall asleep, then they wake up in the night and they don't feel refreshed when that darn alarm clock goes off in the morning.
Right. Wow. So this sounds like everybody.
Yeah, it has sort of become normal to need caffeine in the morning, some kind of sugar or coffee break nap in the afternoon, and then like a sleeping pill or melatonin or something to fall asleep at night. And it's not normal. It's common. It's probably a lot of people can relate to it, but it's not normal. It's not supposed to be that way.
I feel like you just described my life. That's frightening. Because I had been feeling a lot of stress lately, but obviously I'm pertaining it to everything going on in my life. Okay, it's normal to be stressed. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of lack of control.
Mhm.
So what I've been taking like a natural melatonin at
Yeah.
night just so I can, it's almost like my insurance to get to bed. But I've been waking up at 3, 4 a.m. trying to get back to sleep, and then I'll wake up at my normal bed, wake up time at 6 a.m. and I'm tired, I get going, but yeah, I run to the coffee machine, and then obviously like I like to go to the coffee shop in the afternoon, and but
Yeah.
yeah, but I do feel that I run a pretty stressful life, but I also think that there's something that's out of balance.
Yeah. And so, for all of us, if we have a stressful day now and then cortisol helps us to adapt. It's good. The
Yeah.
problem is when the stress is kind of going on for a long time and the cortisol gets out of whack, it gets harder for us to cope. So now little things will happen. And even if it's not that big of a deal, it feels so stressful. So like everything feels stressful, like just, getting the groceries home and unpacked is stressful.
Yeah. So what do people do to get those back in check?
Well, there's actually a lot of things. Some of these other things that we're going to talk about, you kind of need a doctor's help. But for this, there's a lot that people can do for themselves. So the thing about stress is it is less about how much stress you have in your life, and it is more about how you allow the stress to affect you. So if you are somebody who's like a glass half full person, you're optimistic, you see the positive in things, then you're going to have the same amount of stress, but you won't feel as bad as the person who's the glass half empty. They're pessimistic. They see the negative and everything. Same amount of stress, but they're going to feel a lot worse. So how you allow the stress to affect you is really, really important. And it's easy to say, just think positive and, be happy.
Yeah, right.
But what's hard is to recognize when you're doing it. So if you can recognize that you're like ruminating over something like, I can't believe she said that to me, like kind of replaying the conversation over and over again in a loop in your brain. If you can catch yourself thinking that way, we call it automatic negative thoughts, ants, or stinking thinking. There's all different ways of describing it. But if you can tell yourself to stop, like to break that thought pattern, sometimes if you say it out loud, stop, or put your hand up, like, no, stop, then saying it out loud kind of breaks the thought pattern and makes it easier for you to turn your brain over to thinking of something good. So catching yourself doing it is the hard part. Once you catch yourself doing it, you can break the pattern and think about something better. And a really great way to think about something better is to think of 3 things that you're grateful for, because it's really interesting how our brain works. We can't feel stressed, angry, bitter, whatever, at the same time as we feel grateful. And you can, even no matter how dire the circumstances are, you can always find something to feel grateful for. You know, even if, I don't know, you have 3 flat tires, you can be grateful that the 4th one is still okay. Gratitude is something that we can all do, and you don't have to wait till you're in a dire situation. If you were to start your day off, let's say with a gratitude journal, or end your day before you go to bed, writing down some things that you're grateful for, it really changes the chemistry in your body, and it helps to calm down cortisol, which makes a really big difference. So that's one thing, is how you allow the stress to affect you. Another thing that I find really helpful is how we hold our physical body makes a difference. So at the computer, I always catch myself hunched over, right? We're like all scrunched like this. If you think about it, we're kind of curling up practically halfway into the fetal position.
Yeah.
So when your brain can tell that you're in this position at your computer, it thinks that there's stress and it shoots out more cortisol. If you can just take some breaks at the computer and do the opposite, stretch your arms up, open up like this. Now your throat is exposed, your belly is exposed. This is a very vulnerable position, and we wouldn't do that if we were not in a safe space. So if you can just stretch like this for a few moments, it literally sends your brain a message, it's okay, and your cortisol levels can calm down a little bit. It's really interesting. But it's a simple thing, right? You don't have to spend an hour and a half at a hot yoga class. That would be good too. But it's just a simple thing. You can do it, I don't know, once an hour or whatever. And then one more exercise is a great stress balancer, right? Because we all have stress. You can't take all the stress out of your life, but we want something that can balance the stress. So exercise is a great stress balancer, unless you're uber competitive. Like if you're running a marathon, that's a really big stress on your body. But otherwise, exercise is a great stress reliever. And breathing. So meditation is wonderful. It's a little bit hard if you're just getting started. Do you meditate?
So I always had trouble with meditation. So I came up with my own version of meditation, where it's like I will just breathe in like as much as I can, and then hold it, and then breathe out, and then breathe. So I try to do it as much, but I don't do the whole, I can't do the sit for 5 minutes and just breathe type thing. That doesn't work for me. So when I'm at a calm spot or I need to calm down, I will do the meditation, but that's what works for me. Yeah. So it's like everybody's a little bit different. I can't like do the whole
what I find is people who are like a little bit type A and used to getting lots of things accomplished, busy, yeah. And that's me too. We have a really hard time kind of trying to turn our brains off, but we need it more than anybody else, because meditation is kind of like exercise for your brain. So your muscles, you move them to exercise them. Your brain, you have to sort of try to calm it in order to make it stronger so it works better for you. But I remember January of 2019, my New Year's resolution was, darn it, I'm going to start meditating. And so what I did is I put a little timer on my phone for 3 minutes. I was just going to meditate for 3 minutes. And I sat there and I closed my eyes and I started concentrating on my breathing. And like I got bored right away and I felt like panicky, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to do this? And I looked at it had been 90 seconds. I couldn't do it. But I stuck with it, and eventually 3 minutes wasn't hard, and then I could get to 5 minutes. So I think it's a little bit like jogging. You wouldn't get up off the couch as a full-fledged couch potato and go try to jog for 10 miles. You would just walk, right? Or you would just go to the corner. So the same thing here is what you're doing, I think, is the exact right thing to do. Just bite off a little bit. Just do some deep breaths, some slow breaths. Just start with a little bit of something, kind of make it a habit, and then over time you can kind of build on it. But it's really powerful medicine. I mean, there's no prescription for this. You don't have to have special training. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It really makes a difference in really helping with cortisol.
So you're really, when you're meditating, when you're in a full-blown meditative state, you're only thinking about your breath going into your solar plexus and down to your stomach and then out of your solar plexus, correct? I always find holding your breath is a good way to shut your mind off because you're thinking about when the heck I can stop.
Yeah. So focusing on your breathing is helpful. What we really want when you're meditating is we want you to be aware of what you're thinking about, just sort of observing your thoughts. And so, if all of a sudden you start to think about, I don't know, whatever happened on the last TV episode, or, if you can catch yourself going, oh, my mind wandered, and just kind of bring it back to think about your breathing, but you can think about, how your feet feel in your shoes, or, you can just, your mind doesn't have to be totally blank. Okay. You just kind of want to be mindful of what you're thinking about, kind of like you were an outside observer, watching what was going on in your mind. And that's easier. That's mindfulness. You want to be present. You don't want to, because we spend so much of our day thinking about all this other stuff that's not even what's happening to us right now. And all of that busyness of our brain isn't so good for our brain. We need our brain to be calm. Makes a really big difference for cortisol.
Okay, so that's amazing. So those are the three things that you can do to lower cortisol. So the gratitude, the posture, really sitting up straight, stretching yourself out, and then meditation. So if that doesn't seem to be working and you're still stressed, what would be the next step?
Okay. There are some supplements that are available that can be helpful.
Okay.
There's this whole class of herbs. These are things that have been used for thousands of years all over the world in order to help people cope with stress. And one really sad story about this is apparently, and I don't read Russian, so I can't verify this firsthand, but in Russia, like in the Gulag, like back in the Soviet Union, they experimented with an herb called rhodiola, and they would give it to like the prisoners in the Gulag to help them be able to withstand stress so they could work harder before they collapsed. So, like I said, I don't read Russian. I can't verify this personally, but some of the research comes from there. There are herbs that have been used in India and China, all over the world for thousands of years. One of the really common ones that's used today is called ashwagandha. And ashwagandha helps with how our brain sends the message about stress to our adrenal glands, because there's a really important connection between your brain senses stress, sends a message to your adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, and they're the ones that release cortisol. And so the messaging system to control how much cortisol is being sent at what time of the day is really, really important. And these herbs seem to help reset that circadian rhythm. So ashwagandha, ginseng, holy basil, there's lots of different blends of these herbs, and sometimes those can make a really big difference for people.
So it was ashwagandha, holy basil, and what was the second one?
Ginseng.
Okay. So they can take either or should they take all three?
Either or. A lot of times they come as a blend. Like if you, and I would really strongly recommend if somebody was going to go out and buy nutritional supplements, like this isn't medical advice, right? I mean, I don't know your listeners, but if as a general statement, you're going to buy nutritional supplements, it's really important, in my opinion, to buy them from a really reputable place, like not one of the big box chain stores, because it's not that, I don't want to name any names to get you into trouble on your podcast, but it's not that those big box chain stores have only bad supplements, but if we were going to go on a scavenger hunt and our goal was to find the worst quality supplements that we could possibly find, those are the first places that we're going to go look.
What about Whole Foods?
So Whole Foods is better. Health food stores are better choices. A lot of times, doctors' offices and chiropractic offices are, they'll sell better nutritional supplements. And of course, you can get things online. It's just, buyer beware, because sometimes it's hard to know. They can have really flashy marketing, but it's really hard to know about the quality of the herbs.
So, okay, so that's good to know. All right, let's move on to some other hormones. So they go into a doctor that it's either urine, blood, saliva, maybe all three.
So for cortisol, it's best in either saliva test or urine test, because it changes over the day. And so with a saliva test or a urine test, we can measure in the morning and midday and, supper time and bedtime. And then we can see the pattern, and that pattern is so important. In fact,
Right.
If the pattern is flat, it's supposed to have that circadian rhythm. If the pattern is flat, that's actually a risk factor for heart disease.
Interesting. Okay, so that's an important test to do. Everyone really should do. And then what about the hormones, your testosterone, your
So
estrogen,
yeah,
all that stuff?
so we got the women and we got the men, and some things
Yeah.
some things are really, really different. So let's talk about men first. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So cortisol, both sexes, I mean, everybody. For men, testosterone is kind of the main hormone that we sort of talk about. And testosterone is so important for confidence, competitive drive, motivation, get up and go, so that when you wake up in the morning and your feet hit the floor, you are ready to conquer the world.
Yep.
When testosterone levels go down, then it affects self-esteem, assertiveness, confidence. It's harder to make a decision. You worry about things. You don't quite feel the same. And if your role as a provider for your family, or, in your career, if you are in sales or finance, or, you're a CEO or some kind of a leader or whatever, you need confidence, motivation, self-esteem,
Yeah.
focus, drive. And so it can impact how you feel on the inside, but it can also impact, your career, and it impacts your energy. So now you don't really feel like going to the gym or, exercising and taking care of yourself. Testosterone is actually, of course, really important for everything to do with sex. So libido goes down, erectile function is not as great. And it affects your physical body too. So testosterone helps to keep you strong. And if testosterone goes down, you tend to end up getting flabbier and more prone to injuries, harder to recover after exercise. Things just change. And what I hear men say all the time is, well, I don't feel the same as I used to, but maybe it's just because I'm getting older. I hear that all the time. Maybe it's just my age. And my response to that is, if you are 97 years old, we will totally blame it on your age. But if you are 55 or 45 or 35 or even 65, no, something is wrong and we can help to fix it. So when testosterone levels go down, it impacts risks for heart disease and diabetes. It can affect cholesterol levels. And really importantly, it affects mood. So anxiety and depression are common symptoms that we see when testosterone levels go down. But if you march into your doctor's office to say, I have no energy, I feel unmotivated, I'm worrying about things, that's just got Prozac written all over it. And the problem is, if we're treating you with Prozac and the problem is low testosterone, then the medicine isn't really going to work because it's fixing the wrong problem.
Isn't that crazy? Because they do actually say that men that are in their 40s are the highest risk for suicide.
Wow.
And I wonder if it's because they always said, oh, their emotions were suppressed and they were raised to not talk about their emotions, and don't be a pussy, don't talk about your feelings, but it sounds to me like it might have a lot to do with the hormone levels dropping off and our primary doctors not addressing those.
And, it used to be that this was for old men, when you got old, your testosterone went down. But in our modern world, we're seeing low testosterone levels at younger and younger ages. And some of the reasons, one of the reasons for low testosterone is stress, because when cortisol goes up, it kind of suppresses testosterone. And so in some cases, if we can normalize cortisol, testosterone levels will get better. Another thing that we see is when men have inflammation, when they have diabetes, when they have belly fat, that belly fat is a hormone factory. And what it's doing, it's creating all this inflammation, which is bad for you, but it's taking your testosterone and it's converting it over into estrogen. So now these men have low testosterone and a high estrogen. And if you're a man, that doesn't feel right.
No.
So in that case, if all we did was give you more testosterone, we just end up causing you to make more estrogen. And again, you would say, well, the testosterone's not really working for me, but it's kind of solving the wrong problem. We need to help you to keep your testosterone as testosterone. And then a third really common thing that we see in men younger and younger is just the impact of all these toxins in the environment, plastics and pesticide residues and all sorts of things. many of them are hormone disruptors, and they can cause low testosterone. So one example was antibacterial soap. The ingredient in antibacterial soap is called triclosan. And a few years ago, it very quietly got taken off the market because triclosan is a hormone disruptor. It was interfering with testosterone. And we know from some like rodent studies that, I don't remember if it was gerbils or hamsters or whatever poor creatures this got tested on, but it made their testes turn from pink to blue. And, you know, we can't do studies like that on human men. And like, there's nobody standing up, raising their hand to volunteer for these studies. So there's a lot that we don't know. There's another one called Atrazine, which is an herbicide. So it gets sprayed on the crops to, you know, kill the weeds. But then the water runs off into the ponds and the streams, and it's turning boy frogs into girl frogs. And again, like, what exactly does it do to boy humans? Well, who knows, right? Because how do you study that on humans? So there's thousands of chemicals in the environment. Most of them weren't even tested. But we know that these have a significant impact on our hormones. And so trying your best to avoid chemicals helps. You know, you can't avoid everything. You can't live in a bubble. I know Elon Musk wants to send us to Mars. I don't know. Maybe there'll be less toxins on Mars. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just so, I mean, people have always said, like, try to use clean shampoos and skin cares and things, because obviously our skin is our biggest organ, our head, and it really kind of affects you. Now, I'm drinking a bottle of water out of plastic. I know that they've redone the plastic since the whole BPA thing, but probably better to put it in a glass.
Better glass. And, you know, you can buy the glass reusable bottles that have like the silicone around them. So, you know, if you drop them on the floor, they don't smash.
Yes,
or
okay.
you can buy stainless steel. So more and more options are available to us. Like a lot of like lotions and potions and all the things we rub on our cream, you can buy the ones that right on the front, they'll say parabens free, which is parabens is one of the chemicals that we want to avoid. So do your best to try to avoid chemicals.
So it's so crazy how everything has just kind of changed. But yeah, it's just all the hormones they were putting into that was getting into the milk and then the foods. And it's like we're living in a more toxic environment today, but we have somewhat of a longer lifespan than like back in the day. So it's just, you know, it's always a catch.
Yeah.
So let's talk about women.
Yeah. Okay. So women have a whole different set of issues. So let's maybe start like 20s and 30s and like just kind of work our way up. So when women are in their 20s, some of the things that we see in terms of hormones are like a lot of women are on birth control pills. And the thing about birth control pills is fine, they help you to not get pregnant, but they also lower testosterone. And testosterone is really important for sex drive. So now women are walking around feeling like not good about themselves. They've got low libido. They don't really understand why. And it can be their birth control. Another is a lot of women have something called Pcos, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. About 1 in 10 women. It's really common. It causes irregular periods. Women can have acne or hair growing in the places that they don't want. Sometimes it can cause them to gain weight. They can even have hair loss. So it's really common. It's a common cause of irregular periods, and it can lead to infertility. But what happens most of the time is they just get put on birth control pills, which regulate their cycles, but it's not really fixing the underlying problem. It's just kind of kicking the can down the road. And so then when they're 30 and they want to get pregnant and they go off the birth control pills, the problem is still there. So if women have irregular periods, whether it's they're not getting their period or their period is coming all the time, and they go see their doctor, this is something to ask about. Could I have PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome? It's important to know.
Yeah.
Once women get to be, well, and any kind of hormonal problem that women may have in their 20s, you know, lots of PMS or period problems or whatever it is, usually there's an underlying something that's causing it. And so if we can find the underlying something and fix it, that's really what we want to do, as opposed to like giving birth control pills as putting a Band-Aid on the symptom, but it's not really fixing the problem. Once women are over 35, then things change, right? Like our ovaries are getting ready to start slowing down a little bit. And the first hormone that starts to go south is called progesterone. And progesterone is the one that's progestational. It helps with pregnancies. So, as we get to be in our late 30s and our 40s, it gets a little bit harder to get pregnant. And this is one of the factors there. But progesterone is the calming hormone. So we sleep soundly at night and we're chilled out and relaxed. And when progesterone goes down, we don't sleep as well at night. We can start to have night sweats, especially before our periods. We can become more anxious. We can be more irritable. And so this is one of the things that had been happening to me. I was waking up with panic attacks in the middle of the night for no reason. Nothing was going wrong in my life. There was nothing for me to be worried about, but I woke up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. And then I had no patience with my children. And I was, screaming at my husband. So progesterone is the calming hormone. And how you can recognize if this might be a problem for you is it tends to be cyclic. So you're supposed to have the most progesterone during the 2 weeks before your period. And if this is not happening, then especially that week before your period, you can have more PMS symptoms, more of the bloating and breast tenderness and fluid retention, the mood symptoms, just feeling really draggy and emotional. Periods can get heavier. And then after your period, you get back to normal again. So if you feel one way the week before your period and very different the week after your period, then progesterone is something that may likely be part of the problem for you.
Okay. Got to get my progesterone checked.
Okay. So then when women get kind of 45 to 55, this is when estrogen starts to possibly decline. And when estrogen goes down, then eventually periods will stop, and we call that menopause. But the years before that, when the progesterone goes down first, sometimes the estrogen goes up overall before it goes down, or sometimes it's erratic. And I heard another gynecologist say, I thought this was a good analogy, that when women are perimenopausal, that's the time leading up to menopause. It's kind of like puberty in reverse.
Okay.
During this time in our lives, our ovaries are like a bad employee. You never know if they're going to show up for work. Even if they show up, you don't know if they're going to do a good job. They're just really unreliable. But in this time frame, women often have problems with heavy periods, like just bleeding all over, fibroids growing, fibrocystic breasts. A lot of women end up having hysterectomies because of these issues. And a hormone imbalance is one of the things that's pushing all of this to happen in the first place. Yeah. And then once we're in our 50s, usually by then estrogen goes down, and then we have a whole new set of symptoms. Now, no more periods, but the hot flashes and the brain stops to function. You can't think of the word that you want to say. And why did you walk in the room? And where did you leave the car keys? And what's that person's name? And the vaginal dryness. Just everything gets dry eyes, dry mouth, dry skin, everything gets dry. So depending on where you are in your life, there may be different things going on. And for men, if men suspect that they have low testosterone, they can go to their doctor and say, could my testosterone level be low? And their doctors will typically order a blood test and say, here's your number, yes or no. For women, you can't just walk in and say, test my hormones, because that's just not what they do. The one that sometimes gets tested is called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. And that FSH is a blood test. And what it's telling us is, are your ovaries doing a good job or not? And really what it's testing us is, are you sort of able to get pregnant or not? So once you're, in your late 40s, if your ovaries are kind of going downhill, the FSH level will change, and your doctor may tell you that you're in menopause, and yet you're still having regular periods or periods, which is confusing. But really what they're saying is your ovaries aren't really ovulating regularly anymore, so maybe you don't need to worry so much about birth control, but it's not really telling you anything about what's happening with the rest of your hormones. So it's not really answering the question that women are asking, which is kind of difficult.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. To be a woman, so much complication.
I know, right? The men, testosterone is high or low or whatever. We got all these different ones that are cycling all over, and no wonder we're a hot mess sometimes.
So if somebody doesn't feel good, like I haven't been feeling that great for the past month, I would say. I've been just anxious, I've been stressed, I've been more sensitive to things happening around me. And I'm thinking like I think something, needs to be fixed. But we're going to come back right after this quick break and we will talk about my hormones.
This episode is brought to you by Balance 7. Balance 7 is a concentrated alkaline with a pH of 11 plus. I didn't realize that acidosis is responsible for almost every infectious disease in our world today. With COVID-19 and the world opening back up, I started taking Balance 7, and after 3 days of taking it, I feel better. I have more energy. My focus is better. I think clearer. This supplement is amazing. Thanks, Dr. Noristani, for the recommendation. And all Next to Madison listeners are able to try it today by visiting balance7.com and enter code word Madison for a complimentary gift and free shipping.
Okay, we are back. We're going to talk about my hormonal situation. So I should probably go to a functional medicine doctor, get everything tested, just to make sure, because you and I had talked when we had met offline, and I was saying how I'd been to a hormone person in the past. They diagnosed my low vitamin D levels. They said something about progesterone. I don't know if it was low, and then my thyroid. So fixed all those, and I started feeling better, but now I'm like, just something's not, I don't feel good. And I'm like, this isn't normal.
No, it's not normal. You're supposed to feel good. And, hormones are just a piece of the puzzle, like you said, right? Like vitamin D can be off. You can be low in vitamin B12 or other vitamins, and you can have problems with digestion. It's so common for us to find people who have things like IBS or, digestive problems and hormone problems because they kind of go together. So really, when we see somebody, if somebody comes in and just like you, right, they say, I just don't feel right. We want to look at hormones, and we actually look at 4 pillars of health. So we look at your hormone balance. We also look at digestion and nutrition. Like we want to know your vitamin and mineral levels. Could you have hidden food sensitivities causing problems? We want to think about toxins and how well your body is able to flush those toxins out. That's primarily your liver that does the job, and your liver needs the right nutrients. There can be genetic differences. So if you're not a good detoxifier, then sometimes your natural hormones like your estrogen, for example, can build up and cause more symptoms. So we want to think about toxins. And then lifestyle habits, because of course, if you're eating your leafy green vegetables and getting regular exercise and going to bed at a decent time and working on your meditation. Like if you really work hard on your lifestyle habits, you're going to feel better. But the problem is when you feel crappy, it's so much harder to lace up your sneakers and go for a walk or chop the broccoli. You don't feel like that. You feel like, the Krispy Kreme donuts and, whatever comfort food makes you feel better. But all of these factors are really important. And so I feel like a really holistic approach, looking at all of these things together, is really the best way to understand what's going on, because then when we really understand what's going on, then we have more tools in our toolbox to help guide you to what can you do to fix it and get back to normal again. And just what we're really trying to do here is get to the root cause of why you're not feeling your best, so that we can fix that and you can feel better.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of sounds logical, but it's actually not what we were really quite trained to do at medical school. At medical school, we were more trained to make a diagnosis. We want to put a label on you. We want to call it depression or insomnia or IBS or whatever. And then once we have the label, then we want to look up in our little book, what's the best pill for this, and write you the prescription. But the problem is there's no prescription for, I just don't feel like myself,
Wow. Right.
And they do have one called Prozac, and we've got Ambien. Like we've got prescriptions that your doctor can give you. And listen, I believe that your doctor cares about you and wants to help you. And, I don't mean to be belittling doctors in any way. It's just, these are the tools that they taught us how to use. And in this particular scenario, the tools aren't really the right tools for the job.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so interesting how it's like, I'm just sitting here like thinking in my head, like, I gotta get this fixed, because when I went to that person, it was years ago. Things have changed.
Yes, things change. That's, and you know, especially
5 6 years ago.
women. Yeah, right. Like every kind of decade, things kind of shift a little bit. And, you know, we didn't talk about testosterone for women. Do we have time to talk about that for a
Yes,
minute?
we do. And I think that's very important because I told you when we met, I was like, I feel like I have a very high level of testosterone because I feel, even though I look very feminine, I feel like a dude. Not like a full dude, but I'm like tough like a dude. I'm like, fucking let's make money in the markets, bro. Let's do it. You know, like I feel like a man, like a tomboy.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's important to say that to some degree, these hormones impact kind of who we are on the inside and how we react to the world, right? So if you are naturally somebody with a little bit more testosterone as a woman, you are more likely to be a female athlete or to become like a lawyer or, you know, work in corporate America, like things that are, we maybe think of as more, you know, traditionally male jobs, just because you thrive on the adrenaline and the competition and, you know, whereas if you're somebody naturally who has very low testosterone levels, you know, maybe you would, you know, migrate more towards being a florist or a kindergarten teacher or something, you know, completely different. And I mean, I don't like totally have all the science to back that up, but it just, it impacts our behavior. And for men, there actually was a really interesting study where in the morning, they drew blood from all these men and they got their testosterone levels. And then the men went off to work and they observed them. These were stock traders. So they observed them on the stock trading floor. And what they observed is the men who had the highest levels of testosterone made the riskiest trades and made the most money. So I'm not saying that having higher testosterone will help you make more money, but it gave them more, you know, they gave them more balls, right? Like they put it out there and they were more successful. So these hormones impact women just the way they impact men. It gives us our competitive drive, our confidence, our assertiveness, our decisiveness, our get up and go. And too much testosterone in women can cause oily skin, can cause acne, can cause hair growing where you don't want it. I mean, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. But really commonly, when women are in their 40s, testosterone levels can drop. And when testosterone levels go down, the way that women tend to describe themselves is just kind of flat, like unmotivated, blah. Like they just don't really feel like doing the things they used to enjoy. And we tend to put one foot in front of the other and make our way through the day. And if something has to be done today, we'll make it happen. But if it doesn't really have to happen today, we tend to just kind of leave it by the side and procrastinate and worry about it some other time. And I hear that all the time. And then it also impacts sex drive. So like caring about sex in the first place, even thinking about it, like popping it into your mind, like just the desire goes down and the arousal, like it's just everything about sex goes downhill when there's no testosterone on board. So same is true for men and for women.
Okay. That is very interesting because it's like sometimes, the hormones are such a complicated area, but they really drive everything you do.
They do. They really drive our behavior in many different ways.
So from what I'm interpreting from this and what I want to reiterate to the listeners is if you're somebody who is on quite a few medications, obviously consult with your doctor, but I think you should also get your hormones tested because I have a lot of friends that are on Prozac. I was on it myself for a couple years because I was getting PMDD and I was able to I had my eggs frozen and it shifted something in my hormones and I was able to get off of it by the grace of God. I don't know what happened. Something happened within that shift and it went away. But I remember before I'd gone on that Prozac and I'd had my hormones tested and they were out of whack, I felt like shit. I didn't feel like myself. I felt like I looked one way to the world on the outside, but felt so awful in a totally another way on the inside that I couldn't function. It was affecting my confidence, especially with dating. Why would somebody want to be with me? Like, I'm not good enough, even though I was damn good enough. So I think everyone needs to have their hormones checked because if it can help you get off a pharmaceutical medication, you're going to be better off. The pharmaceuticals, if you can avoid them at all costs, do it.
Yeah. And you know, the thing about things like the antidepressant medications is if
you become like a box.
If you are in the pits of despair and we can get you from like abject misery, at least to like functioning. And, like that's really important. But what they don't do is they're not happy pills. Like they can't give you your joy back. And so here, what we're talking about is not really so much the difference between being hopeless and in despair and non-functional, but if you're just kind of flat and unmotivated and you've lost your spark and you've lost your joy and you're looking for how to get those things back, sometimes it can be a hormone problem. And getting back into balance just makes such a big difference.
Yeah. And I would say, like, if you're somebody who's not on something, you're even thinking about going on antidepressants, I would say from my experience with everything, get your hormones checked first. Because you might find, because I remember when I went to go get antidepressants and I couldn't, and my mom said, go to a hormone person. This was like 6 years ago. They diagnosed me with a thyroid imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And vitamin D level so low it was dangerous, and I was on prescription. So if I had just gotten a antidepressant, I would still have those issues. And in fact, my vitamin D levels were so low, I could have developed like a serious cancer and could have been dead by now. Because
thyroid, we didn't really talk about thyroid, but when your thyroid is off, it affects your metabolism. Like, we tend to gain weight, but it's really important for brain function. So it's really important for mood. And a lot of times what happens is we are trained as doctors to wait until your thyroid function is so bad before we jump on it. But, it takes a long time for your thyroid, to kind of deteriorate down, and those years don't feel good. And even if you're hypothyroid, like one of my stories is that I was hypothyroid. I was on thyroid replacement medication, but it wasn't working for me. So I was still tired all the time, and I was still irritable and anxious and having all these issues. But my lab test looked normal because of that pill that I was taking, but it wasn't really fixing all the problems. So even for people who know they're hypothyroid and they're on thyroid medication, if they're still having a lot of symptoms, it may be that that your body's not able to properly use the thyroid pill that you're on. And so there's more that can be done. Or maybe your thyroid is going downhill, but it's not all the way off the deep end yet. And sometimes what we see is that your thyroid gland is fine and it's making the right amount of thyroid hormone. So your blood tests look fine. But if you have too much stress, too much inflammation, if you're missing certain vitamins, then you can't use the thyroid hormone. You can't activate it into one called T3, which is the one your cells actually need. And then you still feel all those symptoms. And how frustrating is it when you keep going back and every time your doctor says everything is normal?
So what do? I think you just described me. I mean, I did miss my medication for 5 days because I just didn't have time to run to the drugstore. I kept forgetting. I'm back.
Well, so a functional medicine doctor can do a more comprehensive thyroid panel to get a better look at all the different thyroid hormones, at least to be able to predict, like, is this working for you or is it not working for you? But for me, I was on the other thyroid pill for 10 years and I was always cold and I had like dry hair that was like just limp and dull, and I had dry skin and, just like all these symptoms. And
wow, you're like describing me at this exact moment. I'm always cold. I have to sit outside. Everyone's like, it's 90 degrees. I'm like, I have to sit outside. I can't be inside.
yeah, oh no, the air conditioning, OMG. In the summer,
I'm miserable.
90 degrees outside, and I would go into an air-conditioned restaurant or a movie theater, and I'd like physically be shivering. It was so uncomfortable. And sometimes I would go sit in the parking lot, like on the little curb, and just wait to be served because it was too cold in the restaurant.
I know, just to heat up. I mean, that's how I am a lot. Like, I like to eat outside and blah, blah, blah. So I do, so go to a functional medicine doctor, but usually these are not covered by insurance, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So that's a challenge. The reason that most functional medicine doctors don't participate with insurance is because what insurance pays for is a quick visit in order to figure out what prescription to give you. They're paying for the standard kind of medicine that we were taught at medical school. And that's not what we're talking about here. So when I see
want to
people,
keep you kind of sick, so you keep coming back for more.
So when I see people, a typical visit is 45 minutes. Like I can't do this in a, 7 to 15 minute visit. And so it just doesn't fit. And I actually know of one doctor who decided this was the best way for him to practice medicine. And so in his family practice office, where he did take insurance, he just switched over and he started doing nutritional counseling and doing some specialized tests and prescribing vitamins instead of prescriptions. And what ended up happening is Blue Cross Blue Shield audited his charts, and they saw that he wasn't putting everybody on Lipitor and Ambien and whatever. And basically they said, this is not what we want to pay for. And they made him pay back all the money, and they put him out of business.
Insurance
So
companies are sick. They really are sick.
Well, so that's why functional medicine doctors just function outside of insurance, because we work for you, right? You're paying us to give you our best advice. We don't work for the insurance company or the hospital system. And so we're able to do whatever is best for you. So to me, while I understand that there are going to be some people who can't afford it, my hope is that the more CEOs and executives and like people who can afford it, the more they learn about this and see the value and get the benefits for themselves, the more trickle down there's going to be over time, so that it becomes something that is possible for anybody that's interested.
I know, but obviously you guys have an uphill battle because they want to keep us sick. I think there's cures for most everything, and they're not doing it. So obviously a patient cured is a patient lost. So understand that. And that's why I'm saying get your hormones checked before you go on a drug and continue feeding this gruesome, nonstop, keeping us sick field. Now there's some medications you absolutely need. I need my thyroid medicine. I have to stay on that. I've wanted to get off of it just because I don't feel like paying for it. But it's easy enough. If I miss it, no big deal. But yeah, the more you can get off medications, the better. I mean, sometimes I'll see I'll have an aunt come and visit or whatever, and they have a whole doc kit of just drugs.
I know.
I'm like, no wonder you feel like shit.
Yeah. I have an older relative who was on so many medications, and I would look at her list of medications, and some of them are like duplicates, like they're two things that do the same thing, and that there's so many of them that it just kind of gets like the doctor loses track, and the pharmacy just keeps filling everything, and and she didn't understand what she was taking and why. And it's really hard. It's really difficult. That's not where any of us want to be. If you have to make the medicine, fine. But, we want what I really want for everyone is I want for us all to take charge of our own health, take responsibility for our own health. There's so much you can do. Eat healthy, move your body, manage stress in a healthy way, right? Drink your water, go to bed at we know these things, right? You don't even really need a doctor to tell you those things, but take charge of your own health. And if you're doing those things and it's not enough and you still don't feel good, or if you're really having a challenge and you're not able to you're just not able to do it, even though you're supposed to, it's not happening.
Yeah.
That's when you reach out. And there's so much more available today. We've got all kinds of fancy tests that we can do to understand how your body is working. But it's like when you go to, you take your car in and they lift the hood and they do the 12-point inspection, right? That's what you think you're getting when you go for your annual physical, but it's so superficial when you go. They're basically looking for, do you have a disease that, is readily obvious here? And they'll check your iron level if you're tired. So they'll tell you if you're anemic. They'll check a TSH, which is the screening test for thyroid, which will tell you if you're full blown off the deep end hypothyroid. And beyond that, they don't really have so much to offer when you tell them that you don't feel good.
I know. So it can be a very frustrating thing for people. So you guys, obviously your health is your wealth. So I would, if maybe it's I don't want to pay, it's a lot of money, cut back on the coffee. Get more steps in instead of driving to the supermarket. Maybe take a stroll to the supermarket. There's certain things you can do, but your health is going to help. If you don't have your health, you can't create more wealth.
Yeah, so, this is a really important investment.
Yeah. So if you want to make more money, you need to make sure you're feeling fucking good. And if you're not feeling I haven't been feeling good. I'm just admitting that to everybody. I've been feeling a little down. I've been feeling anxious. I've been feeling, and I keep thinking, chalking it up to my life that's a little bit nuts right now. But really, there's something else kind of going on. So I'm going to make an appointment. I wish you were in my state because I would just go to you. But so where can they find you? Because you've got blogs, you've got information, everything.
Okay. So my practice is in North Carolina, in Charlotte. It's called Signature Wellness, and our website is signaturewellness.org. And we have lots of information on the website. I've written 2 books. So for people who just, like for women who want to know, could my symptoms be from a hormone problem? I wrote a book. It's got a bunch of checklists. So you can it's a quick, easy read. You can kind of check and sort of say, okay, yeah, my hormones are out of whack. I need to find somebody.
Yeah.
And at the back of the book, there are some references for where you can go to find doctors like me if you live in other places. And you can actually download a free copy of the ebook at isityourhormones.com. The book is actually called This Is Not Normal, and it's available on Amazon. For men, I wrote a book too, because I really want men to take charge of their own health and not blame it on their age.
Yeah.
And the book for men is called Why Can't I Keep Up Anymore? And it's available on Amazon too. So those are some resources to learn more. And I have 2 places if people are wanting to find a doctor near them. Mm-hmm. There's a website called a4m.com, and that has it's an organization that trains doctors, and they have a resource, you can find a doctor on their resource listing. And then another one is called IFM, Institute for Functional Medicine, ifm.org.
Okay. And the first one was A as an apple, the number 4.
A as an apple, the number 4, and then the letter M. It stands for American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So 4 A's, A4M.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so those are good to know. So, okay, perfect. And then, so Dr. Deborah Matthews, or Deb Matthews, she goes by Deb, Dr. Deb. Definitely look up her stuff, read her blogs on the website. They're very informative, and I so appreciate you coming on this podcast. I felt like you were kind of just what I needed. It's just been kind of stressful and crappy. So now it's just that second reminder to go get those checked out again.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for being here, and everybody listening, wherever you're listening. I hope that this podcast is going to encourage you to become even healthier so you can get wealthier and happier. Of course, you got to be happier to be healthier and wealthier. That's what the podcast is about. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Next to Madison. We'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.